got it's such bunk. Seriously, people wrote me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "Bunk." He said, "I agree."
Yeah.
This is the second vaccine likely to cause acute hypersensitivity reactions.
Right.
They're so fuzzy, you can't believe it. The whole world and all the news media are going on about it.
Well, see, this is such a really good, like if we talk about rabies right now or leptospirosis, which both have high chances, probability of your pet having a reaction to it, that a veterinarian by law has to give that vaccine. So if a veterinarian gives this to your pet and your pet dies, it's not malpractice.
Right.
And that's where the emotion, comes into play, is then people will go read about how horrible the rabies vaccine is, and then they want to blame the veterinarian. But Anna, have you seen these cases?
Well, yeah, and I think there's a caveat there too, because one, I think Dr. Dodds makes a really important point about like how the veterinarians can really only do what the owners consent to. And
Right.
that's a tough pill sometimes to swallow when you can see that the owners are either not understanding or simply don't. There are some people that will just walk out and say, I don't want to spend $2,000, and so I will simply let my animal die. And it's devastating and sad to hear about. But when it comes to the vaccines, there's certain vaccines that are law mandated, and we've seen all that stuff in the news, about the rabies scare. I think the international one was extremely overblown. But that said, with rabies vaccine, a veterinarian can, at least in most all states, it's the veterinarian who can step in and say, look, your animal is either too sick, is compromised, or some reason should not get that vaccine. But that's not for every animal. That's just, whether your animal is in a particularly bad state. Like if your animal's getting chemotherapy, not a really good time to get a rabies vaccine. And I have actually seen veterinarians make mistakes where they say, well, no, I have to give this vaccine. It's like, no, you don't. There's an exception in the law that allows it. So it can be malpractice for a veterinarian to give a vaccine when it shouldn't be given.
Yeah, especially when the label says only for healthy pets. So
Right.
What we do, we issue in Southern California, public health veterinarians refuses any exemption. So we defer it. Not healthy. So we defer it for 3 months, and then in 3 months it's not healthy, we defer it because we sign an oath that we will when we know that it's not safe for this animal to do it. Now for leptospirosis, I think it's not mandated. So the issue is, are these strains of leptospirosis that they claim are causing so much harm actually doing what they're doing? And there's not good evidence that they are. Mindset of veterinary medicine and veterinary public health that vaccines are perfectly safe, they don't cause reactions. Look at the people that won't get a vaccine, right? Because they say it causes clots. Well, you have this issue with the J&J vaccine. 50 to 60 people out of 11.5 million minor clots, and one person actually passed away that had very serious other illnesses. The problem was those were people congenitally or familially deficient in the surface of their blood platelets that protected them against clots. So they had a molecular defect in their bodies susceptible to having a clot form with this vaccine. 11.5 million, and the whole world went berserk. I'm not going to use this vaccine anymore. That's totally ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
It does go to, like, I think it is a bigger underlying condition now where people are not as trusting. Like they don't do their research. They don't know. Maybe if they do the research, they don't know how to understand it, and they're kind of going with the loudest talker as opposed to the one that's most knowledgeable and really able to give a good answer, which is kind of sad.
Look at the personal protection. They don't wear masks. They won't. They don't. They're not doing anything. Did you see the University of Virginia just refused acceptance to people coming into the university that wouldn't wear a mask?
Yeah.
Said, forget it. You're not coming in here with it. You have to think not just about yourself, but all the other people that you're around that could be susceptible to have other diseases, be elderly or be very young and be immunocompromised. It's about society and helping each other.
Yeah.
I should add, with the Dr. Dots, have you seen like the crossover? Because like COVID, is a zoonotic disease. And, has there been much talk, of crossover from, human to animal?
No, only cats, big cats. Not with that whole crossover issue was not true. Hamsters are at risk, and primarily cats. Remember they killed and mink. Remember they killed all those mink in the Netherlands?
Yeah.
Because they said they were going to be infectious to people. Not that we should be growing mink anymore. Never mind. That's another issue.
I'm with you.
Let's go back to one of the problems I think is actually happening with regards to standard of care. So we had one of the other fabulous attorneys on, and he was talking about the difference between the standard of care in human and the standard of care in veterinarians. And he makes this really fabulous point that veterinarians, like, I forget what his numbers were, but it was something like if you had 10 doctors, human doctors, and 9 of them would make this decision, or I think he might have said 8, then that's the standard of care. But with veterinarians, it's a little bit lower because they're dealing with animals who cannot speak, and there's all these other factors that go into play. But do you think one of the problems, Anna or Dr. Dodds could probably answer this, is that it's weird because I'm a huge advocate that animals should be seen as more than just property. But on the other side, I think it is fair that veterinarians aren't held to the same standards as a human would be for the very reason that they can't speak to their patients. But because it makes it another element, right? I'm trying to figure out how to treat something that can't tell me everything. But I wonder if people want the standard of care to be identical to what humans' standard of care is.
But children can't. Their guardian or parents have to speak for them. So there's a parallel there. I mean, I don't think the standard of care should be different. The problem is that society doesn't give animals the same value as they do people, okay? And even at the government level, and we know that. And we can perhaps accept that. I mean, I don't like it, and people like you and Anna don't like it. Even Jerry probably doesn't like it. But the fact of the matter is a human standard is a higher level. I mean,
right. But
for
I think
rabies,
yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of room for objective criteria though as well, because like you don't hear as much about rounding or like checking with other doctors before making their decisions final, before advising the human guardian, as to what they should do for their animal. And that I think is where, it's not really going to progress as quickly as probably we need. So it's more that the consumer, of the veterinary services, they're going to have to do more research and know what, ask questions, get second opinions, do the things that, you might do if it were your own health or your, or someone else that, that maybe you're concerned that they are not going to speak as much. But I mean, the human guardians of these companion animals, I mean, they see them every single day. They're usually going to, they're going to bring them in and say, look, I've noticed they're walking a little funny. I don't know if it's a big deal or not, but I really would kind of like the x-ray, or I'd like to know if there's something, just to get a baseline. And I think they're going to just need to be more proactive. But I see your point in that, yes, this is a different species, it's a different different type of analysis, but I think there's enough objective criteria. And I think a lot of the vets, especially those that have experience, can see these issues because they do come up again. And even people will hide their their issues. They'll go to a doctor and they'll say, oh no, I feel fine. They're not fine.
Yeah, right.
The doctor knows they're not fine.
Yeah.
Well, and more pet owners need to have, pet caregivers need insurance so they can afford to have it. They need to really buy pet insurance. And there's an example with rabies. The World Health Organization says that a rabies titer of national units in the serum protect a person against rabies. The World Health Organization. The states by CDC is 0.1 international units per mil. So people rabies tighter on a pet that if they have less than point, but 0.1 or higher, that they have to or be put to sleep. When in fact the CDC standards is different than the World Health Organization standard, and most people don't know that.
Wow. So with the whole goal here, Joey, is, and we've talked about it many times, is changing the laws because we think that by doing so, we really, for those of you who don't know, your pets are seen as property in the eyes of the law right now. So
Right.
if Anna has a case and your pet, you're become a victim of veterinary malpractice, it's it's hard cases to win because they're just considered property, and so we need to change that. And so we keep looking at ways that we can do that. And I don't know if you all have read this article, or Dr. Dodds, if you've seen it. The AVMA just came out against changing the law to make pets, and they gave this reason why, and they argue, which to me was kind of a good thing to read because I feel like the pressure might be coming away towards them a little bit, because the article says, well, you don't want that, pet parents, you don't want them to be seen more than property, because then veterinary care will get too expensive and nobody will be able to afford it. Have you seen that article, or do you have any comments?
It's called the ostrich effect. Carrie, bury your head in the sand. Okay.
Yeah, I don't agree, because first off, like the malpractice insurance for veterinarians is actually not very high, and they have pretty good, like a lot of them have like $500,000, $1 million coverage. So
Yeah.
there are no cases that get that high unless you're really doing something astronomically bad and it with intention. So I mean, their insurance companies are really the ones driving this, and I think AVMA, I don't know if they use PLIT or whoever it is, but they AVMA always comes out because they're in a great position right now. I mean, who do you know that pays, thousands of dollars to bring their toaster back to health? Nobody. But they like to go with this oh, they're just property. They're property like a table chair or a toaster, and they're not. And what's nice is that there have been some strides in the law. It's just that most of these strides have come in the intentional side, like for animals that have been beaten, have been abused. There the law will go after the abuser, and they'll say, like, yeah, well, this animal, you clearly knew that this animal was bonded, had a bond to somebody, and they're really kind of allowing it to help the person whose animal was hurt, because they know that person has a bond with that animal, and that was emotional distress. And so there are a lot more laws in a lot more states, Illinois included, that if somebody intentionally harms your animal, then yeah, you can go after for real damages, like for Illinois has the Humane Care for Animals Act, and if somebody tortures or abuses in a way that fits within that act, they're going to have to pay for your attorney's fees. They're going to have to pay for punitive damages, anywhere from $500 to $25,000 per act, and they have to pay for all of the veterinary care to try to help that animal and the person's emotional distress for that animal's loss. But when it comes to the negligence, the courts have kind of leaned back on, like, oh, well, they're property. So like if you get in a car wreck and your car is destroyed, and say your car costs $10,000, the court's not going to allow you $50,000 to bring your $10,000 car back to restore it. They're going to say, here's money to go get yourself another car that's worth $10,000. But the trend, more trending has been, especially because people have realized, like, our animals are not tables, toasters, and chairs. The courts are recognizing kind of more of what's called actual value. And it was something that it's value to owner. Now, what that means specifically is it's not like you're going to get the same amount, for the loss of a spouse or loss of a child or something like that. The court realizes that this is their expectations are different. Animals don't live as long, or non-human animals don't live as long as people. You're not necessarily expecting a longer, life than that, but they do recognize that the bonds are strong, and that they recognize that people have a deep moral, commitment to taking care of their companion animals. And the reason I say companion animals is because the AVMA fought the term companion animal. They didn't even like that to be used. I have to find it, but I have some articles from a long time ago where they prefer the use of pet because it's more distant. It's more like, furniture or something to that end. But we all know animals are not furniture. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to have the degrees that Dr. Dodds had to see that, I hit my table, it doesn't cry. I step on my cat's tail and they're going to be pretty upset. They're going to be mad at me. And, that you can see that animals have their own societies. They have their own interactions. And the fact that we don't recognize that, I think it's really sad. But the law, already recognizes certain things and it's expanding. But there's going to be a hard push against it by the veterinarians because, or I shouldn't say that. And I don't mean Dr. Dodds and, inclusive, because there are many veterinarians who understand that, but for these bonds that we have with our animals, there would be no veterinary service. My toaster breaks, I throw it away.
They're also getting a lot of the recent awards are also emotional stress to the person who lost a pet. In other words, the pet may be considered property and you get $600. I'm just making up a number, but you have emotional distress in addition of that. They'll submit their bills and they'll look at it and they'll give them some explanation for that. The AVMA is not the in veterinary medicine that has a very, I've been a member for 56 years. I'm a, whatever you call, honor roll member. I don't have to pay dues anymore. Whoopie doopie. And why do I stay a member? Because that way I can I write letters to the editor.
But that's
as long as you don't say anything pejorative,
That's one of the reasons, like we tell people, like if your animal has been harmed or killed by a veterinarian, you're pretty sure that have the cells preserved. Now you may not want to clone your animal or anything like that, but the reason we, if we're, and you rarely get a chance to interact with somebody, usually it's long after that where, they've not been told about, freezing cells and that. But if the veterinarians want to argue that this is a market value, so here's $200, go buy another dog. Well, you can say, well, I don't want to buy another dog. If I'm going to get the exact same genetic dog, I'm going to clone them, and that's $50,000. So if they want to argue market value, which, understandably, most of our, pet people aren't going to necessarily want because that's not the same animal. But if they want to argue it, then we have an argument. But I think the trend it would
look at the veterinarian in Texas that shot an arrow through that cat's head and then bragged about it online. She lost her license.
And she should.
Wait. Yeah, but not initially.
Yeah, and some of the things I see, it's just discouraging.
That's horrible.
Yeah,
horrible.
Because but that's like one instance where you see that the disciplinary bodies actually stepped in. A lot of times they don't. A lot of times it's a hard push to get them to take action because they're people that have been used to this model of like, okay, I'll pay a whole lot to bring my toaster back to health, but that's just a toaster. But the younger, I think there is like a give and take, because the younger generations as they're coming up, as attorneys and judges, and that they are recognizing that animals play our companion animals play a much different role in our lives than maybe they used to. And they're recognizing that, maybe their bond with their dog was far closer to either one of their parents maybe, or, what have you. But that's something that there's a recognition that these bonds are real and they need to be valued. And for a veterinarian to simply say, after it was their mistake and your animal's dead, oh, well, I don't value your bond. It's just pure hypocrisy. Pure hypocrisy.
It is pure. That's the point that you have made a lot on here is you're charging as if it is more than a toaster until you mess up. And then you want me to change my viewpoint on the animal that you were charging me accordingly to. It's such a good point.
And it's not enough to just give you back the money you paid in because you get nothing then for that bond. It's like, okay, so you're basically going to pay me back all the money I paid you to make a mistake. No, that's not enough either because there's no disincentive. But what I also see, and this is the part that makes me really upset, is that, not every veterinarian does things, pure of heart. I mean, and I guess that's the question is that you have to understand that veterinarians are very highly revered practice. They're usually very well liked. Not like attorneys. Attorneys, take attorneys to court. They're probably not going to do so well if they're the defendant. But I mean, veterinarians. Most people think, oh, well, you must love animals, so you certainly don't want to hurt them. But there are veterinarians that, for whatever reason, maybe they have, decided they needed more money. Maybe they've crammed their practice full so that they could make more. We even have a veterinarian who removed a microchip from a stolen cat. So for, and the microchips, they're like $30 to $60. The surgery to remove it was like, the whole shebang was close to like $1,000. So when you look at things like this and you realize that not everybody's acting pure of heart, and sometimes it's harder to convince others that that's the truth. That's what you're fighting when you're going into these cases, because you're fighting a system that doesn't necessarily want to change. You're like, oh, we don't want them considered anything more than property, but we do want your money, thank you. Yeah. But and then to say that you would ever bring your animal in, I mean, it's not like it's not that just breeders or show animals or what have you. It's not simply a market that's driving it to the extent of oh gosh, we only want the purest bred animals. No, people like the animals they get at the shelter, and they are absolutely happy. They're treated like kings in their homes, and that should be understood and valued.
We have to start preparing everybody. I think we just had a case on here we talked about. I think last week we did a special with a pet guardian who lost his dog Glocky. I don't know if any of you heard about this story, but the pet passed away from heat exhaustion at a doggy daycare. And it was interesting. I'm kind of interested as to what Dr. Dodds would say about this. So the pet is taken to the veterinary hospital and passes away there. And the veterinarian said that, put the dog on ice, as they do. And then when the owner asked to get a necropsy, they said they couldn't because the dog was on ice, and that now they can no longer do that.
That's not true.
Yeah.
Right. And so I questioned whether there was a relationship between the boarding facility and the veterinarian, and they were trying to hide it, which to me seemed kind of really sad, because I don't think, not that this means it's doggy daycare intention was heat exhaustion. I think they just are ill prepared to handle it when it happened and how to prevent it. But now it's turned into so much more once that veterinarian prevents him from finding out the actual cause of death. But it just, like, that's the kind of stuff that continues to go on, and I don't know how we stop it. So we have to start preparing people. You always want to get a necropsy, right?
Always.
Like you have to get it, if not to get the answers of
for heat stroke, can't see anything unless the animal had some abnormal or internal organ thing that made the dog susceptible to intravascular clotting, thrombosis, in other words, because of heat stroke. And necropsy is important, and the fact that it was on ice has nothing to do.
Yeah.
But if it was just stroke and a otherwise healthy animal, you wouldn't see anything.
Yeah, and I think that's it's not necessarily for that particular case, but making people aware that you have to ask for your records. You have to, and it's so hard when we're going through it, and you think, like Anna pointed out, most times people think they're veterinarians, went all the way through vet school, and they love their animals. And I'm here to tell you, I worked for a veterinarian that did not like animals. I don't know why he was a vet. He hated animals. He couldn't stand them and complained all the time. Now, I obviously think that's the small percentage, but we do have these situations. So you have to be prepared every time. Get your records, ask questions, get a necropsy. You're just going to have to, because we don't have much without it, right?
Yeah, even if you don't get an answer from the necropsy, it shows that you took the reason